Hey everyone. Have you ever had that feeling like something's just off in a relationship? Like a little voice inside you whispering, this doesn't feel right. But you can't quite put your finger on what it is.
It's so common. And the thing is, these kinds of dynamics, they aren't always as loud and obvious as we think they should be.
Totally. It's not usually a dramatic blow up, it's more like this slow burn. And it can really leave you feeling drained, questioning your own judgment like, is it me? And nobody deserves to feel that way. You deserve relationships that make you feel good, relationships that light you up, not the opposite. So, to help us unpack all of this, we're turning to the experts at Lifelens Talks. They had some really insightful points on how to spot those red flags.
They really hit the nail on the head with how they defined what a toxic relationship actually is. Because let's face it, that word toxic gets thrown around a lot these days, doesn't it?
It does, it's become kind of a catch all. So, before we jump into those red flags, maybe we should start with what actually makes a relationship toxic. What are we really talking about here?
You're right. It's important to be clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
And Lifelines Talks made a really good point. They said it's not just about regular relationship ups and downs. Disagreements happen, right? It's normal to have friction sometimes. But toxic relationships, those are different.
Right, because everyone argues sometimes. That's just life.
Exactly. It's about the patterns you see, the consistency of behaviors that make you feel bad about yourself.
So it's not just a one-off fight. It's this constant feeling of being drained, of having your self-esteem chipped away.
Yes. Like a death by a thousand paper cuts, where each one might seem small on its own.
But they add up.
Exactly. And what makes it even trickier is that toxicity exists on this spectrum, right? It's not always screaming matches and huge blowouts.
Sometimes it's quiet, almost sneaky.
Right. It can be really subtle, which makes recognizing those red flags even more important.
Absolutely. So let's talk about those red flags. What's the first alarm bell we should be listening for?
Well, one of the biggest ones is constant criticism and belittling. And this one is often disguised as feedback, which makes it even sneakier.
Yeah, it's that I'm just trying to help you improve routine, right?
Exactly. But think about it. If someone is constantly pointing out your flaws and mistakes, if they rarely acknowledge your strengths, that's not helpful. That's not constructive. That's eroding your sense of self-worth.
It's the difference between, hey, maybe we could try a different approach next time versus you'll never be successful,
Yeah, exactly. Or how about, you're lucky I even put up with you? Hearing that regularly, that's not feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That's a direct hit to your self-esteem.
Ouch. Yeah, that's going to leave a mark. And, that brings up a good point. Pay attention to how those interactions make you feel. If you consistently feel smaller, less than, after spending time with that person, that's a huge red flag.
It's like they're slowly chipping away at your sense of self, bit by bit.
Okay, so red flag number one, constant criticism. What's the next one we should watch out for?
Red flag number 2 is controlling behavior. And I think this one often hides behind a mask of care or concern, which can make it harder to recognize.
So we're not talking about a partner who checks in with you after a late meeting or makes a suggestion because they're genuinely looking out for you.
No, this is about power and dominance, even when it's presented in a seemingly caring way. It's about trying to control your choices, your actions, even your thoughts. Like, imagine a partner who dictates who you can and can't spend time with, or demands to know your whereabouts 24/7. That's a big warning sign.
Yeah, that's so different from genuine care and just wanting to stay connected.
Absolutely. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not on needing to control the other person's every move. If you're feeling suffocated, like you have to ask permission to live your own life, that's a major red flag.
And you know what? That leads perfectly into red flag number 3, emotional manipulation. This one can be really insidious because it makes you, the person being manipulated, question your own reality.
It's incredibly powerful and unfortunately very common. It makes you doubt yourself, your memories, your perceptions.
We've all heard about gaslighting, but what are some other forms of emotional manipulation that we should be aware of?
Oh, there's so many. Guilt tripping is a big one. Those, if you really loved me, you would kinds of statements. Or playing the victim, constantly shifting the blame and making you responsible for their emotions. And then there's passive aggression, using subtle digs, backhanded compliments, the silent treatment, all designed to make you feel bad without them having to explicitly say what they're upset about.
Ugh. It's like they're masters at twisting the narrative to fit their needs, and you're left feeling so confused, doubting your own sanity. It's crazy making.
And that's exactly what they want. They want you to question your own judgment, your perceptions. Because the more you doubt yourself, the more reliant you become on them for validation and approval.
Which is why it's so important to remember. You are not overreacting. You are not too sensitive. If something consistently feels off, it probably is. Trust your gut.
It's like their goal is to mold you into this perfect version of what they want instead of just, you know, accepting and loving you for who you are, flaws and all.
Which brings us to red flag number 4, lack of support and respect. And this one really gets to the heart of what a healthy relationship should be, a partnership.
Right. It's about being seen, being heard, being valued for who you are, even with those quirks we all have.
And this isn't about agreeing on everything because, come on, healthy couples disagree. You're not always going to be on the same page.
It's more about how those disagreements go down.
Yeah.
It's the difference between, okay, we see things differently and that's okay, versus feeling like your thoughts and feelings, your goals and dreams are constantly being dismissed or minimized. Like they don't really matter.
Right. Like imagine you're super excited about some new project and you share it with your partner and they just shrug it off. Or worse, they try to make it all about them and their own thing. How deflating is that?
The worst.
And
Or they shoot down your ideas without even trying to understand where you're coming from.
yeah,
Over time, that lack of support, that lack of respect, it can really eat away at you. It chips away at your self-esteem, your belief in yourself.
it's the opposite of feeling like you've got someone in your corner cheering you on.
You hit the nail on the head. Feeling supported by your partner, that's a huge part of what makes a relationship feel good, feel fulfilling.
And speaking of fulfilling, or maybe I should say unfulfilling, let's talk about red flag number 5, walking on eggshells.
Oh, that is the worst. It's so draining. It's like you're constantly holding your breath, afraid to say or do the wrong thing, because you never know what might set them off.
It's like living in a minefield, right? Instead of feeling safe and comfortable with your partner, there's this constant tension, this anxiety. Can you give us an example of what that might look like in a relationship?
Okay, picture this. Your partner has a really volatile temper, like scarily volatile. Even simple conversations feel risky, like navigating a minefield, like you said.
Right.
And so you end up censoring yourself. You don't speak your mind. You don't express your true feelings because, honestly, you're afraid of how they'll react. You're afraid of setting them off.
Yeah, I've been there. It's exhausting. You're always bracing yourself, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. And after a while, it takes a toll. It prevents you from truly relaxing, from being your authentic self, from having that real intimacy that should be there in a healthy relationship.
It's like a recipe for emotional exhaustion and resentment, for sure. So, okay, let's say someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, these red flags sound so familiar. What do you do then? That can feel pretty overwhelming.
It absolutely can. It's a lot to process, especially if those patterns, those red flags, have been there for a while. But you know what? Just recognizing the problem, that's huge EE. That's a major first step.
So if you're listening to this and some bells are going off, please know you are not alone in this. It's way more common than people realize. And thankfully, it doesn't have to be the end of the story.
Exactly. Remember that Life Lens Talks episode we mentioned? They had some really great advice on what to do next.
Great. They talked about the importance of seeking support, which can be scary for people. It's vulnerable to open up about these kinds of things.
It really is. But it makes a world of difference to have someone to talk to. A trusted friend, a family member, a therapist, even joining a support group. It can be so powerful.
It's about having that safe space to process everything, to make sense of what you're going through, and then to start figuring out, okay, what do I do now? Because let's face it, this stuff is hard. Trying to navigate it all on your own, it's tough.
It really is. And, you know, it's not just about talking. It's about taking action. And one of the most important things Life Lens Talks highlighted is setting boundaries.
Yes. Boundaries are so important in any relationship, but especially in a relationship where you're seeing these red flags. But it can be so tricky to actually set them, right? Where do you even begin? It can feel really uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to asserting yourself.
You're right. It's definitely a skill you have to build.
Yeah.
But essentially, setting boundaries is about clearly and respectfully saying, this is what I'm okay with, and this is what I'm not okay with. It's about defining your limits.
And it doesn't have to be this big, dramatic showdown. It can be really simple.
Exactly. It
But-
could be as simple as, I need some space right now, or I don't like it when you talk to me like that, or I'm not comfortable with this behavior.
Right. It's about saying, this is important to me, and I need you to respect that, even if it's difficult, even if the other person doesn't like it.
Exactly. And that's the thing about boundaries. How the other person reacts. It tells you a lot about the relationship.
It's like a test, in a way.
It really is. Like if they respect those boundaries, even if it takes them a minute to adjust, that's a really good sign. It shows that they're invested in the relationship, that they're willing to work with you to make things healthier.
But if they get defensive, dismissive, try to guilt trip you into backing down.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
Uh,
That tells you that they're more interested in maintaining control than in respecting your needs.
and that's tough to realize. But it's important information, right? It's better to know, even if it hurts, so you can make good choices for yourself.
100%. Staying in a situation where your needs aren't being met, where your boundaries aren't being respected, that's not good for anyone. And, setting boundaries, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's like any skill. The more you practice, the better you get at it.
Exactly. And the easier it becomes to stand up for yourself,
Yeah.
to ask for what you need. But I know some people listening might be thinking, okay, all of this makes sense, but I don't even know where to start. It can feel overwhelming, right?
Yeah,
Like, how do you go from feeling powerless to feeling empowered enough to actually create change?
it's a big step. So for those who are feeling that way, what advice do you have for them? Where do they even begin?
First and foremost, be kind to yourself. This stuff is hard. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to not have all the answers right away.
Mm.
And change. Change takes time. So start by getting clear on what your boundaries are. What are your non-negotiables in a relationship? What are the behaviors that you're no longer willing to tolerate?
It's about saying, okay, this is what I deserve. What do I need to feel safe, to feel respected, to feel loved?
Yes, it's about reclaiming your power. And once you have a better sense of those boundaries, those non-negotiables, then you can start communicating them clearly, calmly, consistently.
Don't be afraid to reinforce those boundaries if you need to.
Absolutely. What might feel weird at first, especially if you're not used to it. But the more you do it, the easier it gets, I promise.
Yeah.
And hey, remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Right. Lean on those people who support you, who want the best for you. Talk to a friend, a family member, a therapist. Having someone to listen to you, to validate what you're going through, it makes a world of difference.
It really does. It's like having someone there to hold your hand as you're navigating those rough waters. Someone to remind you of your worth, to cheer you on.
So if you took away anything from this deep dive today, if you felt that little nudge to make some changes in your own life and your relationships, please know you are not alone in this. These are really common experiences, even though we don't always talk about them. And there is no shame in seeking support and asking for help.
None whatsoever. In fact, it's a sign of incredible strength to recognize when something isn't working and to take steps to change it. Because at the end of the day, you deserve to be in relationships, all kinds of relationships that bring you joy, that feel supportive, that are built on mutual respect.
Beautifully said. Remember, you are worthy of love, you are worthy of respect, and you deserve to be in relationships that uplift you, that make you feel safe to be your most authentic self. Never forget that.
Yes. Never settle for anything less.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into toxic relationships. We hope you found this conversation helpful. And remember, if you're looking for more insights on building healthier, happier relationships, check out Lifelens Talks for amazing guidance from the experts. Until next time, take care.